Haruka is a lonely boy who keeps to himself, avoiding his classmates. But his life takes a sudden turn when he's transported to an ice sky, a mysterious dimension, where he must lead and protect his classmates on a dangerous adventure. The story kicks off with this boy spying on a bunch of goblins, chilling around a campfire. He steps on a twig, and the snap gives him away. The goblins are on him, chasing hard. But while he's running, he cracks a smile. This is all part of the plan. Next thing, the goblins drop into a pitfall trap he set up earlier. The boy steps out, showing his face, thinking that was close. Good thing I had that trap ready. Right now, he's surviving solo in this world. Then his mind flashes back to the day he first got thrown into this other world. Haruka's sitting by himself at his desk, cause he's a straight up loner. He knows it, and honestly, he's cool with it. If he wasn't chilling solo, he'd have to hang out with his classmates, and he can't stand those folks. The class is full of different cliques. You got the delinquents, the popular girls, the gym bros, and then the randoms nobody pays attention to. He doesn't fit in with any of them, and that's fine by him. More time to dive into his books, no need for friends. But his quiet time gets interrupted when a bright light pops up underneath him. Looks like some kind of summoning circle is showing up under the student. For a second, Haruka gets hyped. He knows this means an ice sky adventure is coming. Then it hits him. He's been getting way too much screen time for a loner. And if there's one thing he knows about ice sky, it's that things are about to go sideways for him. He's not gonna be some casualty before GTA 6 drops though. While the portal's still loading, he makes a break for the door, trying to dip out. But the door's locked tight with magic, and no matter how hard he pushes, there's no getting out. The portal's almost fully loaded now, and his classmates start fading away, getting pulled into it. Haruka, not down for this ride, makes a last-ditch move and crawls up into the ceiling vents, hoping to hide until it blows over. He sneaks his way into the roof of the classroom, thinking he's in the clear. But right when he's feeling safe, the summoning circle tracks him down through the roof and pulls him in anyway. Sucks he couldn't stay on Earth, but he figures some fat king or cute princess is gonna pop up, asking for help or something. But that's not what happens. Instead, Haruka sees this bald old guy freaking out, waving his arms around like crazy when he spots him. Turns out, the old man's some kind of supreme being, the one who was behind the whole summoning. He's already sent the rest of Haruka's classmates to the other world. But since Haruka pulled that ceiling stunt, his summoning got delayed. Now the old dude's in a rush to send Haruka off before he gets in trouble for messing things up. The supreme being tells Haruka he's gonna get some abilities to help him in the other world. But there's a catch: he showed up late, and all the good abilities have already been picked. What's left? A bunch of throwaway skills nobody wanted. We're talking Minecraft villager abilities, gambling dice, contact lenses, and a stick, among others. To top it off, he can only pick a few. Haruka loses it, going off on the old man for dragging him into this mess and leaving him with garbage abilities. The old man knows he messed up, but he ain't about to let some high school kid scream at him like that. So he tells Haruka, "Fine, you can have all the leftover skills, but I don't want to see your face around here again." Then, without warning, he teleports Haruka straight into the other world. Now, having more skills than most sounds nice, but it's not much help when you're dumped in the middle of the woods with no gear. Haruka's never survived in the wild before, and he's got nothing to work with. Then he spots a pouch on the ground. Turns out it's tied to the Minecraft villager skill, and it lets him store unlimited items in his inventory. Luckily, there's some starter gear inside, so at least he's not totally screwed. Once he's got his stuff together, he decides to check his stats. But thanks to the gambling dice, he's gotta roll a number to get his stat points. He rolls the dice, lands on an M, and has no clue what it means. Whatever, he throws all his M points into his luck stat, figuring it can't hurt. To his surprise, when he checks his stat window, his luck stat is maxed out. Now he's kinda wishing he used it on something else. As he keeps scrolling through his stats, he realizes, besides the trash skills, he also picked up 2 unique abilities. Because he was such a loner back on Earth, he won't be able to form a party here, even if he tries. But the upside is that his second skill lets him force monsters to serve him, since he won't be making friends with humans. Haruka's a little bummed out that he won't be building a harem anytime soon, but it is what it is. Right now, he's more worried about the fact that none of his classmates are around. It's weird, especially since this is supposed to be the starting point for everyone. But then again, he never gave a damn about them before, so why would he start now? Right now, Haruka's gotta focus on stacking up supplies if he wants to survive and live decent out here in the woods. Problem is, that's easier said than done, cause with all these trees in the way, he can barely see a thing. At this rate, it's only a matter of time before he stumbles into a monster, and if that happens, he's done for. Then it hits him he's got that contact lens skill. so he pops them in, and suddenly he's seeing all kinds of info about the area around him. Turns out the lenses come with an appraisal skill built in. Now he's able to move through the forest without getting lost, and even spots some mushrooms that won't kill him if he eats them. He picks a few, then heads to a nearby river, using his bag to scoop up some water to drink. Once he's finished, something else grabs his attention. He wanders deeper into the woods and finds a small cave. It looks too interesting to pass up. Haruka says a quick prayer, just in case there's a monster lurking inside ready to jump him. After that, he heads in to explore. Luckily for him, the cave is monster-free, and it's big enough to be useful, so he decides this'll be his new base. He pulls a tent and a magic lantern out of his bag and sets up camp. Then he starts a small fire using his temperature control magic to stay warm for the night. Funny thing is, using that magic once lets him unlock a new fire skill, and being on edge about monsters helps him pick up a bunch of detection skills too. But Haruka's only got a stick for an attack skill, so he's still gotta figure out how he's gonna protect himself. The next morning, he wakes up with a start, nervous about what might have gone down overnight. When he steps out of the tent, he's relieved no monsters attacked him while he was asleep. Turns out those useless skill items he had were clutch for keeping him safe from the creatures. Even though he's safe from danger, that don't mean he's safe from her hunger. So, he whips out a frying pan and starts cooking up some of those mushrooms he picked yesterday. And if you're wondering where he got the pan from, it was just chillin' in his villager bag, along with a full set of kitchen knives and some beef jerky. So far, that bag's been the real MVP in Haruka's arsenal, and he's wondering what kind of villager hooked it up before he got it. Anyway, now that he's eaten, he needs to figure out what the hell he's gonna do next. So he steps outside and takes a little walk to clear his head. That cave might work as a base for now, but Haruka still gotta worry about finding a steady food supply and setting up some protection in case any monsters decide to roll up on him. Luckily, with his contact lenses, it shouldn't be too hard to gather enough food to last a while. He finds more mushrooms and some herbs almost immediately, but the monster problem's still hanging over his head. Right then, Haruka's detection skill kicks in. He notices something nearby, so he goes to check it out. When he gets closer, he's freaked out cause the noise is coming from goblins. And not just one, there's two of them, and they've both got higher strength stats than him. He wonders if he can even take them on with where he's at right now, and starts thinking about bailing. But since he's living in this forest, he knows he's gonna have to throw down with these goblins eventually, so he figures he might as well handle it now while he's got the upper hand. That said, he's not sure his stick alone is gonna cut it, so he tries using a little magic to wrap around the stick, just to see if it does anything. Turns out, it works better than he expected. So, he jumps out the bushes and cracks one of the goblins right in the head. The goblin's dazed and confused, but Haruka ain't done, yet he keeps beating it down until it finally drops. One down. Now he's got to deal with the other one. As it charges at him, Haruka dodges out of the way just in time. Now that he's feeling it, he realizes the goblin's attacks are pretty predictable. He starts dodging easily and smacks it around a few times before hitting it with a magic blast. After winning his first fight against goblins, Haruka decides that's enough action for the day and heads back to the cave to get some rest. So when he gets back, he cooks up some mushrooms for dinner and takes a look at the club he found on the goblin's body. It has high damage potential, but it's heavy and has a short range, so Haruka decides to stick with his trusty stick for now. After that, he checks his stats, and to his surprise, he realizes he leveled up from the fight he had earlier. Not only that, but all his existing stats doubled too. The next morning, Haruka wakes up, has breakfast like usual, but he's starting to get tired of eating nothing but mushrooms all the time. He really wishes he could eat some meat, but he knows he has to learn how to hunt first, and before that, he needs to enhance himself. The first thing he wants to try is the magic fusion skill he acquired. To explain it briefly, it basically covers his entire body with magic to boost both his physical and magical defenses. It also greatly increases his strength, so he should be able to fight much more effectively. Plus, his appraisal skill was upgraded to level 2, so he uses it to check if anything has changed. But the only difference is that there's a question mark next to all the descriptions. Haruka clearly hasn't played video games before, because he spends a whole minute trying to figure out what a question mark icon could mean, and eventually, he just gives up. Instead, he heads outside for some magic training. As he's leaving, he notices something on the ground. He picks it up, thinking it might be meat, but it turns out to be another mushroom. It may be a bit silly, but Haruka was really hoping meat would just grow on trees in this world, and he quickly realizes he's not going to find any meat on the forest floor, so he decides to move forward with his magic training. He activates his mana infusion and takes a step forward. but with the physical boost, he ends up flying several meters ahead. His body feels much lighter than before, and with very little effort, he can easily dart around the forest, almost as if he's teleporting. On top of that, his dexterity is greatly enhanced, allowing him to move and strike with precision. The first thing Haruka does with his new strength is challenge 2 random goblins he sees nearby. Unlike yesterday, when he struggled to take down one, he knocks one out with a single hit. Feeling really confident about this power, he thinks he can handle even more goblins. But when he spots a group of 3 goblins together, he starts to have second thoughts. He slowly backs away, wanting to avoid getting jumped by the whole crew. After that, he decides he's put in enough work for the day, so he heads back to his cave to practice his magic. He establishes a routine where he spends his days fighting and his nights experimenting with magic. To his surprise, he discovers he can even make coffee tables with his magic. By sticking to this routine, he eventually gets to the point where he can one-shot a goblin and craft a proper table. Feeling good about his progress, he uses his magic to create a gate for his cave, which means he can finally go hunting at night. He decides to go after a rabbit because he hasn't had meat in so long, but when he catches up to it and is about to start cooking, he notices something else moving nearby. At first, he thinks it's just another goblin, but then he realizes it's even worse. His classmates from school. He really doesn't want to deal with them, so he plans to sneak away in the opposite direction. As he starts moving, he sees the gym bros, the popular girls, and even the nerds. The nerds aren't that bad. He hung out with them sometimes in school, but he still doesn't want to talk to anyone. Finally, he spots the student council group, which includes the class representative. Even though he doesn't like socializing with his classmates, he admits that the class rep has always been nice to him. He briefly considers saying hello as a way to return her kindness, but he really doesn't want to mess up the solitude he's found. No one knows he's here, and he finally has the chance to be completely alone, just as he's always wanted. There's no small talk, no taxes, and no one bothering him. So after thinking it over, he decides to ignore his classmates and continue living alone, determined to conquer this world on his own. He spots the troublemakers creeping up too close, so he ducks into some nearby bushes to stay hidden. Right when he does that, the troublemakers hear something rustling in the bushes and figure they better check it out. As they get closer, Haruka braces himself, thinking he's about to get caught. But luck's on his side this time because all they find is that bunny he set free earlier, and it bolts off. The troublemakers leave, feeling let down like they were expecting more. Later on, we see them gathered by the river, shooting the breeze. Haruka's lurking nearby, eavesdropping, hoping not to get mixed up with them. Turns out they're just talking dirty about the girls in their class. One of them even cracks a joke about how the deputy class president's watermelon would be big, even in another world. Some of them shift their attention to the girls from the swim team. Haruka's worried about the girls, but then figures they'll be alright. The class rep's with them, and she'll see right through whatever shady plans those punks have. He thinks about how she's been keeping those jerks in line since way back in first grade. Then, they turn to this nerdy guy with them, Tanaka, and ask if they can use their skills however they want. Tanaka says they can, and they start bugging him to teach them more about these skills. Haruka watches this and can't help but think that Tanaka's being treated like their personal search engine, digging up info on skills and ice guy stuff for them. The troublemakers head off with some sleazy ideas brewing, and Haruka figures out they're probably heading toward where the rest of his classmates are, upstream by the river. He decides he'd rather be alone, though, and heads back to his cave. Back at his hideout, Haruka notices his loner skill leveled up to 2. Probably because he managed to stay hidden from his classmates. He's glad his neat title didn't level up, though but bummed about his messed up job titles. He sees that he's reached level 3, but he thinks his Master of None and Blockhead skills are slowing him down. He doesn't even know what those skills are supposed to do. Master of None makes it hard for him to stick to one thing though. He can do other things decently. Blockhead makes him feel like a puppet on strings, pretty much useless. He decides not to overthink it and tries to eat his frustration away, but gets down again because it's mushrooms for the umpteenth time. He wishes he had some meat or fish. The scene cuts to him lying in bed at night, hearing sounds of a fight coming from outside his cave. He can't sleep because of all the noise, so he decides to step out and see what's going on. Figuring good kids should be knocked out by now, he's hoping it ain't the troublemakers again. But when he checks, he's surprised to see the nerds surrounded by a bunch of goblins, trying hard to hold their own in the fight. They're struggling a bit, and he thinks about stepping in to help. But first, he uses his appraisal skill to check out their abilities. Turns out, they're way stronger than him, so he figures they'll manage without his help. Plus, they've got those cheat skills he doesn't. He explains that back in their old world, His class was full of top-tier athletes and brainiacs, some of the smartest kids in the country. There were even some celebrity kids mixed in, and he's still wondering how he ended up in that class. The nerds should be pros when it comes to dealing with this otherworld stuff, so he's pretty sure they'll be fine. Just as he's about to leave, though, he spots some more goblins sneaking up behind the nerds don't even notice, so Haruka decides to step in. He takes out the goblins with his wooden cane, then checks on the nerds to make sure they're good. They've already handled the goblins on their side, so they tell him they're fine. Afterward, they walk around with him, thanking him for the assist. Haruka takes them back to his cave, and they're blown away by how fancy he's made it inside. He explains it's all thanks to his earth magic and some clever packing. They can't believe he pulled it off by himself, and they start saying it's not fair he's got all this space to himself. Haruka asks what happened to the rest of their classmates, wondering if they went off exploring on their own. But the nerds reveal they're actually on the run. Curious, Haruka presses them for more details, and they start from the beginning. They explain how everything kicked off the day they were summoned to this world. After arriving, they were all confused, trying to figure out where they were. It didn't take long to realize they'd been transported to another world, just like the old man said they would be. Some of the girls started crying, missing their families and homes. The rest of the group felt like it was a hassle, not knowing what to do in this strange new place. But the nerds, being familiar with these kinds of situations, immediately checked their stats and recognized their skills from stuff they'd read in manga. The delinquents rolled up on the nerds, threatening to rough them up if they didn't start spilling more about the other world stuff. Meanwhile, the class rep held it together, even with all the chaos going on. She told everybody to chill and warned them not to make too much noise in the forest. But that warning came too late. Some goblins had already tracked them down. Even the class rep couldn't keep her cool once she saw what was happening. The delinquents and some of the girls were straight up freaking out, nearly losing it at the sight of the monsters. But the nerds, knowing these were just goblins, low-level creatures straight out of an Isekai novel, using their skills and what they knew, the nerds managed to put up a good fight. Seeing the nerds holding their own, the jocks jumped in too, and together they wiped out all the goblins. After that, the class rep suggested they move somewhere safer, where they'd have a better view of their surroundings, so they all headed to a river that seemed safe enough. They set up camp there, and the nerds took charge, teaching everyone survival tricks they'd learned from reading manga and light novels. The class rep got everyone organized, assigning tasks, and for a while, things got better. The class started working together and even managed to build a little home base in this new world. But it didn't last. After some time, the girls got fed up with all the manual labor and other chores, and they refused to do any more work. The class rep tried to reason with them, but they weren't having it. Seeing this, more people started slacking off, figuring they could let the nerds handle everything since they were better at it anyway. No matter how hard the class rep tried, she couldn't get through to them. Eventually, she broke down, wondering how things had gone so wrong. From then on, it was the class rep, the nerds and a few others doing all the work, while the rest just lounged around the camp. The nerds were frustrated, especially since they still had to fight monsters to level up. They remembered that some of the delinquents had picked skills like mesmerize and puppetry, which could control others, and they were determined to get strong enough so they wouldn't fall under that spell. Meanwhile, Tanaka had been giving the delinquents all the details on their special skills, including how to control others. The delinquents started secretly leveling up at night by fighting monsters. They figured they needed to level up first to unlock their puppetry and mesmerize skills. But what they didn't know was that the nerds were keeping a close eye on them the whole time. This is when they caught wind of the delinquents' harem plan. It wasn't hard to figure out either, since those fools were being real graphic about what they wanted to do to the girls in class. The nerds took it straight to the class rep, and she decided she had to level up too, no question. A couple days later, the delinquents finally unlocked the skills they needed and thought their twisted dreams were about to come true. But right when they were about to act, the class rep busted in on them right on time. They tried to get nasty and use their new skills on her, but those punks were laid out on the ground, unable to move. The nerds jumped in and used their sealing skills to lock down the delinquents' dirty abilities. With their sleazy plans fully exposed, they got kicked out of the camp, but they weren't taking that lightly. Not long after, the delinquents hit back, launching a straight-up attack on the camp. They didn't care who got hurt, attacking everyone in their path and burning down the whole camp. After tearing through the place, they bounced, telling everyone they'd be back for more. The nerds were crushed seeing everything they worked so hard to build go up in flames like that. Then, the girls turned on the nerds, blaming them for all the mess. They claimed the whole thing went down because the nerds decided to pick a fight with the delinquents. The others piled on too, following the crowd like a pack of sheep. But the class rep had the nerds' backs, knowing full well they weren't the ones at fault. A few other students stuck with the nerds, but things were already getting way too awkward. So the nerds decided to leave the camp. After hearing all this, Haruka feels bad for them and tells them he'll treat them to a feast. Problem is, all he has to offer are more mushrooms. They all sit down and eat the mushrooms, and Haruka ends up spending the whole next day with them, thinking maybe it's okay not to be alone every now and then. The day after, the nerds head out, and Haruka hopes their classmates won't come after them. Before they go, they ask one last time if he's sure he doesn't want to come with them. They're heading to the nearby town to become adventurers and remind him that he's closer to their group than anyone else in class, since they used to share books all the time. Haruka agrees with that, but still turns them down, so they leave. As they're walking off, he can't help but think he'd like to see the town, but his curse skills would just hold him back. After that, he decides to check on the others, since the nerds were worried about the class rep. As he makes his way deeper into the forest, he runs into a kobold. The kobold bites his manhood, but after some struggle, Haruka takes it down and keeps moving. By the time night falls, he reaches the spot where his classmates were supposed to be camping. But there's no one around, and he's left standing there, surprised and alone. He starts thinking maybe they moved camp, so he uses his enemy tracking skills and sees some footprints showing him where they went. He follows the tracks across the river and soon runs into the gals. He tries to bounce before they spot him, but it's too late, they've already seen him. They start chasing after him, and he's sure they're about to mess up his quiet loner life. Then, out of nowhere, they politely ask him to stop. The kindness catches him off guard, so he stops. They ask if he knows where the nerds are, saying he's close to them. Haruka's confused, wondering why they care, thinking they probably just want the nerds to do more chores for them. But the gals surprise him when they say they just want to apologize. Haruka's left speechless. They go on, saying they've realized how wrong they were, and that without the nerds, they wouldn't have made it this far. Haruka feels uneasy watching these selfish gals apologize so seriously. He tells them it's too late to catch up with the nerds now. They still press him to tell them where the nerds went. Haruka wonders if they can even handle making it out of the forest on their own, or if they're ready to fight off monsters they might run into along the way. He doubts they're serious about apologizing, thinking they're going to be a burden to the nerds without any real resolve. Then, the gals start crying, saying they really just want to make things right. They beg him to teach them how to survive in this world and how to find the nerds. Haruka's servitude skill kicks in without him even realizing, and he agrees to help them out. Then, the three girls become his slaves, and they start following him around as he navigates the forest. But the whole vibe is off. The gals barely even respond when Haruka talks to them. He starts wondering what kind of skill servitude even is and why it feels so messed up. It creeps him out how they help him fight monsters, presenting him with the spell stones like they're fetching sticks or something. Haruka notices the leader of the group is injured, so he gives her a potion. Instead of using it, she splashes it on him. Feeling down, he thinks it would be a bad look if the class rep saw him like this. He starts stressing about how he can break the servitude spell and free the girls. And then, right on cue, the class rep shows up. She tries talking to him, but he's too wrapped up in figuring out how to break the servitude skill. She has to shout in his ear to snap him out of it. Meanwhile, we cut to the delinquents, who are still plotting their twisted plans with the girls. They're gearing up to take out anyone who gets in their way first. Haruka starts thinking about why the class rep is hanging around and asks him to call her by her name since they've known each other for a while. Then, the girls who were with the class rep show up too, mentioning he was moving a bit too fast. They're all worn out, and Haruka notices it's all the girls from his class, realizing it's only them together at the moment. The class rep looks over at Shimazaki, the leader of the group, and wonders what's going on with her and the others because they're acting a little off. Haruka's stuck trying to figure out how to explain the situation and hopes someone else will fill him in first. Afterwards, Haruka lets her know the girls are serving him, but the class rep mentions that skill's supposed to be used on monsters. Haruka explains it triggered on its own, and he doesn't know how it works. The girls though give him side eyes, and it's enough to make his skin crawl. He tries to make an exit, but the girls block him, and the class rep's confused about why he's trying to dip out. Haruka's frustrated because he just wants to get back to being on his own. The class rep checks on Shimazaki, shaking her until she snaps out of it and says she's fine. The class rep's relieved to see her back to normal. She says there's no point asking Haruka what went down, so she'll ask Shimazaki instead. While she's questioning her, Haruka tries to slip away again, but the class rep tells him to sit tight. Bored and restless, Haruka figures he'll pass the time by expanding his base. Using his skills, he tries to make a basement, but he puts too much magic into it and ends up digging himself deep into the ground. Haruka's baffled by what just happened, and the class rep tells him, "I told you to stay put." He explains he was just trying to fight off boredom, and she helps pull him out. She also mentions Shimazaki told her everything, confirming Haruka was helping them. Haruka thinks to himself, "I never said that," but the girls go ahead and thank him anyway. Haruka doesn't care much about it though and wonders if he can leave now. The girls remind him he's supposed to help them out. The class rep, confused, asks what he means by home and questions if he was born in this world. He responds, saying he built a home because he had some extra time, but the class rep is sure homes aren't the kind of thing you build just because you're bored. The other girls are straight up jealous when they hear Haruka's got a place of his own. They huddle up for a meeting to figure out what to do next, leaving Haruka outside waiting. During the chat, the class rep calls out to Haruka, asking how many folks could fit in his spot. Haruka casually says his crib could hold about 240 heads. He adds that if he clears out the furniture, includes the bathroom, kitchen, and toilets, he could probably squeeze in even more. The class rep is low-key jealous that he's got the luxury of a bath and a kitchen, feeling like Haruka's living on a whole different level while they're out here barely scraping by. The girls then nudge the class rep to ask Haruka something. Embarrassed, she finally pops the question, could they crash at his place for a day? Haruka's stunned, not expecting the girls from his class to want to stay the night at his crib. His mind instantly drifts into pervy territory, imagining things he probably shouldn't. He jokes that girls these days are wild, and the class rep snaps back, telling him it's his thoughts that are scandalous. Haruka suddenly turned into a hot dog. Afterward, he leads the crew to his home, and after trekking for a bit, they finally get there. The girls are wiped from the long walk, and Haruka welcomes them inside. They're hyped to see his house, and they can't believe he's built something this impressive. Haruka tries to give them a tour, but before he knows it, the girls are already stripping down, rushing into the bath. Haruka is taken aback, watching them bathe, and he wonders if they've lost all their shame from being out in the wild for so long. Meanwhile, the girls are living it up in the bath, and when they're done, they feel refreshed. Haruka, on the other hand, is back in his head, diving into dirty fantasies again. Suddenly, the class rep shows up, snapping him out of it, and she thanks him for looking out for them. She explains that once the nerds bailed, the boys ditched the girls too, and it left everyone in a messed up spot. But thanks to Haruka, the girls are calmer now, and they're feeling a whole lot better, especially with the rooms, food, and baths. She's feeling down, saying she couldn't help much even though she's the class rep. Haruka jumps in, telling her that's not true, she's been holding it down for the girls all this time, even today. The class rep gets emotional, almost crying, feeling like she hasn't done as much as the nerds. But Haruka comforts her, reminding her that she shouldn't compare herself to those guys. They've been prepping to get summoned to a world like this from day one. Haruka tells the class rep that it'd be way weirder if she could do what those nerds are doing. He warns her not to use them as a guide, saying they're the strange ones, not her. This makes the class rep feel a lot better. In the next scene, the girls are knocked out, sleeping peacefully in Haruka's crib. Meanwhile, on the flip side, Haruka's tossing and turning, struggling to sleep, his mind racing with all kinds of twisted thoughts. The next morning, one of the girls wakes Haruka up, telling him breakfast's ready. Haruka, still groggy, wonders what's happening. As he's trying to sit up, he asks for another 30 minutes of sleep. But instead of letting him rest, the girl climbs on top of him, asking if he even plans to get up at all. Haruka gets flustered by how close she is, so he quickly changes the subject, asking what's for breakfast. She says it's grilled fish and mushrooms, and Haruka gets so excited that he accidentally headbutts her in the process. Next, we see him munching on the fish, tears in his eyes because it's been forever since he had some. The girls think he's doing too much, telling him they've been living by a river, so getting fish is no big deal. Haruka says he knows that, but he's been stuck watching the fish this whole time since he doesn't know how to catch them. Every time he tried, they kept slipping out of his hands. Curious, he asks if they have a way to catch them. The scene then cuts to one of the girls using lightning magic to zap the fish in the river. Haruka realizes this is how they've been doing it and asks her to show him again. She tells him to focus this time, and when she starts her lightning spell, Haruka uses his packing skill to grab it. He throws the magic into the water, electrocuting the fish himself. In the process, he learns lightning magic, and the girl's confused about what happened to her spell. The class rep asks Haruka what's going on, and he explains that he learned lightning magic through his packing skill, saying it might be some kind of synergy between his packing and master of none skills. The class rep says it's pretty wild if he can snag magic like that. but Haruka brushes it off, saying it's not that big of a deal, he only has the leftover skills since all the other good ones got snatched up by everyone else. Afterward, the girls splash around in the water. Haruka asks the class rep if she's figured out their next move. She says they're thinking of heading to the closest town, and that's when Haruka remembers the girls are still on the hunt for those nerds. The girls snap back, saying they're not hunting anyone, but the class rep admits they probably need to level up a bit before leaving the forest. Haruka agrees, saying they'll need to boost their levels if they really do plan on taking on those nerds. The girls get even more heated, insisting they're not out here looking for a fight. Haruka offers to help them level up, and soon after, he's asking them about their current levels before they start training. They all shout out their levels, and Haruka finds out they're somewhere between 16 and over 20. He gets low-key disappointed, realizing he's still stuck at level 7. The girls, bored, tell him to hurry up and start already. That's when Haruka spots 3 kobolds hiding nearby. He reveals them and says they'll kick things off by fighting these guys. The highest kobold level is 9, and the girls think they've got it in the bag, but they end up losing miserably. Seeing that, Haruka thinks they're trash, and the girls start making excuses for why they lost. Later, they all gather in Haruka's tent to go over the fight. He tells them that just because his tent can stretch out doesn't mean it's their new meeting spot. They brush him off and tell him to sit quietly, so he just slumps in the corner. After the meeting, the girls get fired up, vowing not to lose again, and gear up for a rematch with the kobolds. Haruka thinks it's cool they're hyped, but he's not sure if they're really ready for round 2. Just then, the same girl from earlier comes up to Haruka, apologizing for testing him before. She explains that she had trust issues because some of the guys in her class tried to assault her, and it left her traumatized. She thought he might pull the same move on her. Haruka's shocked. Can't believe the girls had to deal with something that messed up. The girl says that he's not like those other guys. He gave them food, a place to stay, and even taught them how to fight. She adds that she'll wake him up tomorrow too, and Haruka decides to nickname her the Fish Girl. The next morning, while Haruka's enjoying his fish, he notices the girls gearing up for their rematch with the kobolds, but the class rep stops them, saying they need more training first. She makes them fight some goblins to warm up. Once that's done, the girls head into their rematch with the kobolds. Haruka's hoping they'll be alright, but notices not all the girls are feeling it, some are napping, and others are faking sick. But the ones ready to throw down manage to pull it off, working together as a team and beating the kobolds. They're all hyped that the training paid off, and the class rep congratulates them for their win. Haruka admits they had him worried for a minute, but he's glad they came out on top. He's thinking he can finally go back to his loner life now. The class rep thanks him for all the help, and she mentions they're ready to head to town with him. Haruka's surprised, thinking I never said that, but the class rep makes it clear he's coming, no arguments. He's got no choice but to roll with them. Later, they finish packing up for the trip to town. The class rep checks if they packed the mushrooms, and when she sees they did, Haruka tries cramming even more into the bag. Once they've checked everything, they all head out for town together. Meanwhile, we cut to a different scene. A guy is running, clearly terrified, and he trips. The person chasing him catches up and pins him down. The guy begs for mercy, saying he doesn't have the skill the man's looking for. But the man doesn't care. He strangles the guy to death, cold as ice. Haruka's rolling through the woods with the girls, keeping an eye out cause he knows he's gotta protect them from any troublemakers lurking around. Suddenly, they run into an orc. Haruka tells the girls to watch close and take notes while he handles it. He charges at the orc, dodging its wild swing, and he can't help but laugh at how slow it moves. He remembers from the Brainiacs that orcs have tough physical defense, so he'll have to bring it down with some magic. He checks his skills, sees he's got this new grand magic ability that lets him combine the 4 elements, a trick he picked up thanks to his Packin' skill. Next thing he knows, the orc's charging again, but he slips behind it and cracks it one good with his staff, knocking it out in one shot. Haruka's surprised, thinking his physical attacks wouldn't work on an orc. The girls are staring at him in awe, and he figures he'd better use magic on the next one to make it educational. He slings a fireball at the next orc, but again, it's down in one hit. The girls are left speechless, complaining they can't learn anything from watching him since he's way too powerful. Later that night, they cook up the orc meat, and Haruka sets up some traps with his earth magic. He opens his map, planning the next day's route, but his perception skill kicks in, alerting him to some folks approaching. He's ready to take on the delinquents again, but it's only the jocks this time. Haruka wonders what they're doing out here, following the girls like stalkers. Turns out, they were looking for him. He asks why they're hidden from the girls, and they say they can't trust anyone because there's someone out there with a skill even scarier than the puppeteer or charm skill. Haruka figures they're talking about the hijack skill, but then asks if they're worried he could be the one with it. They reply they'd actually be relieved if he had it, seeing as he likes being a loner anyway. The jocks decide they're gonna go through with it and ask Haruka to help them apologize to the girls. The next day, everyone's geared up, and the class rep pulls Haruka aside, saying she spotted him with the jocks. Haruka mentions their apology plans, but then she flips the script and apologizes to him, confessing she's the one with a hijack skill. Haruka tells her he already knew it was obvious. She's surprised and asks why he'd help her if he wasn't afraid, revealing the hijack skill lets her steal someone's powers by taking their life. Haruka doesn't flinch, saying there's no reason to fear her. He brings up that when the nerds locked up the delinquent's powers, they left hers alone because they trusted her. He says he feels the same way. She's tearing up, and when he asks why, she blames him. So he bolts, insisting he didn't do a thing. She calls after him, saying he's done so much for her. After the groups push deeper into the forest, they stop for a break, and Haruka starts selling juice. The girls are shocked he's charging, and one offers to pay him another way, but the class rep snaps, scolding him until he shuts down his shop. As they keep going, Haruka spots a river up ahead and tells the class rep to handle the group while he scouts alone. She wants to tag along, but he's already running off. He activates his rapping skill to power up his body and uses weight magic to make himself lighter. Feeling like he's almost flying with all these skills stacked. Soaring up high, he's blown away by the view until he starts falling, crash lands, and nearly wipes out all his HP. When he returns to the group, the class rep can't believe how banged up he is from scouting. He tells her about his tumble, adding that he picked some berries for more juice, but the class rep's unimpressed, while the juice girl lights up. The next day, thanks to Haruka's scouting, the crew has a smooth trip and finally makes it out of the forest. The girls are scoping out the scene when Haruka notices he's picked up a new skill, air walking. He tries it out and finds he can walk up in the sky now. The class rep gets all worried about him, but he's already flying high, scoping the area from above, when he spots a group getting attacked by monsters. The class rep insists they should help, but Haruka's cautious, figuring those folks might be bandits, and he doesn't want to risk it. Class rep isn't having it, she grabs him, saying they've gotta help anyway, so he's down to go. Knowing he can't get there by running, Haruka tries something different. He combines his rap skill with weight magic to go lighter, then uses grand magic to whip up some wind, taking flight. But the wind pulls the class rep up with him, and as he zooms off with his airwalk, he realizes she's hanging on for dear life. She yells at him to be careful, but he can't stop in time, so they crash straight into the group. Turns out, he's wiped out all the monsters, and the party leader thanks him, introducing himself as Ofta. Haruka's curious why they were under attack, so Ofta explains they were on a guild quest that was way tougher than they thought. Meanwhile, the class rep is still knocked out, and while they wait for the rest of the girls, Haruka offers the crew some mushrooms he's got on him. Ofta recognizes them as stamina caps, shocked that Haruka's sharing something that rare. The party's health gets restored quick, and soon, the other girls catch up. The group leads them all to the town of Omi, and the girls are thrilled to finally arrive. Meanwhile, the delinquents have leveled up and decide it's time to make their move on the girls. One of the guys they captured suggests they get their skills unsealed, so they decide to go after the nerds first. But we catch the captured guy grinning, and the jocks sense things are about to get messy. Haruka and the girls start wandering around town, but he's feeling out of place and thinks about heading back to his cave. The girls split up, but the class rep blows her whistle, calling everyone back and telling them they need to hit up the Adventurers Guild to register and sell off what they've collected. When they get there, they're all a little freaked by the adventurers hanging around, and they keep hearing that the boss wants to talk to Haruka. So he heads upstairs and meets this intense boss, who starts thanking him for saving Ofta's crew. Afterward, Haruka spots where he can sell his magic crystals, so he pulls them out, and the clerk's jaw just about drops seeing how many he's got. She tells him to come back the next day. The girls tell him they all registered as adventurers, and Ofta mentions they're all around level 30. Haruka gets ready to register too, but when the clerk checks his stats, she breaks it to him that he doesn't even qualify, he's not even level 10. He asks her to make an exception, but she explains that as a solo adventurer, he needs to hit level 20 just to be considered a beginner. He's pretty crushed, thinking he's got no option. Later that night, they head to an inn, and Haruka's surprised by the vibe, wondering if it's a love hotel. Turns out, it's pretty regular, and he thinks about going back to the woods. The next day, Haruka figures the girls should be safe now, so he plans to leave after he cashes in on his crystals. But when he gets to the guild, the clerk hands him all the money they've got, saying they don't have enough to cover everything. So the boss asks if they can pay the rest in installments. They hand him 8 million, and he's feeling like he's set for life. His buddy Godek offers to take him somewhere special, and Haruka starts daydreaming about meeting some cute girls. So Godek takes him to a weapon shop instead, saying it's got some rare gear straight out of the dungeon. He vouches for the owner, even though the guy looks kinda sketchy. Haruka starts testing out different items, but there's this necklace that really catches his eye. It says Fit 7 in the description, just like his own gear, so he asks the owner what that even means. The owner breaks it down, explaining that Fit 7 is all about combining the effects of 7 items so they work together at the same time. Haruka's pumped, imagining all the power-ups he could add to his gear. But right then, the class rep steps in, scolding him and saying it's time for bed. Just then, the vine he's holding activates, making him knock over all the other items, which somehow end up merging together. The owner's heated, telling him that setup was worth a solid 10 million, and Godek's over here trying to negotiate it down to 8 million. By the next day, Haruka's already broke and starts thinking about getting more crystals. But he remembers outsiders can't leave town without being official adventurers with a permit. Wanting to head back to the forest, he uses his newly fused invisibility cloak to slip right past the class rep. He bolts for the wall, figuring he can jump it. But then he hears the girls calling to him, and he slams right into it. Turns out it's the volleyball girls. He's looking around, wondering where their fourth is, so he uses his perception skill and spots Juice Girl undressing again. They rush over to her, but Haruka knows his escape plan is totally done for. The next day, the girls head out on their first quest, and Haruka asks to tag along. But the class reps got no trust left for him after his escape attempt. Once they're gone, though, he slips through the gate with his invisibility cloak. Haruka's hyped to finally be out, but as he's running, he spots a group of goblins. He figures they're not worth his time, so he keeps moving. Then he comes across this wrecked village and decides to pass on that too. But then he stumbles on some bandits attacking a carriage. He thinks about stepping in with his new staff, but ends up wanting to ignore that as well. The bandits don't let him slip by, though they're not cool with leaving a witness. So Haruka lights them up with fire bullets, and he's low-key impressed with how strong his staff is now, realizing it was the vine that turned his stick into this powerful staff. The bandits think he's just some weak magic user, so they try to charge him, but he shuts them down. They start pulling out all kinds of weapon moves, which he knows are skills you only get at level 20, but he dodges them all with ease. One by one, they wear themselves out and end up passing out on their own. That's when this noble girl named Mariel rolls up, thanking Haruka for handling the bandits. But then she says, "Should I even thank you? Though the bandits kinda beat themselves up, and you almost left me hanging." She tells him she's the daughter of a lord and asks if he'll stick around for the rest of her trip. Haruka's thinking he really should be getting back to the forest, but when she promises to repay him, he's down to help. She asks him where he's coming from, but he's blanking on the town's name and just calls it shabby. Then Mariel drops that her dad is the lord of that place, so he realizes they're heading back to Omi City and tries to bounce. But she insists on bringing him along to reward him, so his escape plan flops again. Meanwhile, we switch over to the jocks facing off against some delinquents. Just as the delinquents are about to strike, their leader gets stabbed from behind. Both the gym bros and the troublemakers are straight up stunned by what's going down. But when the rest of the delinquents try to step up and avenge their buddy, the first one who moves in just ends up getting stabbed too. The last two think they've got a shot if they double team, but this mystery attacker still takes them down with no sweat. Seeing all this, the gym bros realize they're way out of their league, so they make a break for it. But the attacker's way too fast, they barely get a few steps before he's in front of them, closing in with this deadly look in his eyes. Meanwhile, Haruka's back in town thanks to Mariel, though he wasn't down for it at all. He only went along cause she started tearing up, so he figured he'd be nice and tag along. Once they reach the Lord's place, Mariel steps away for a bit, so Haruka takes a peek around. The house is nice and all, but that's got nothing to do with him, so he heads for the door to bounce. Before he can get out, Mariel shows up again, mad that he's trying to leave since she asked him to wait for her while she changed. She's all fired up, telling him to chill a bit longer cause she's got something special planned to thank him. Haruka doesn't feel like waiting, but she's laying it on thick, so he sticks around. At first, Haruka's still iffy about staying, but when Mariel reveals this huge feast she set up for him, his whole mood shifts. Mariel put this spread together to show some gratitude, but she's low-key annoyed when Haruka totally ignores her while he's going to town on the food. As he's digging in, Mariel calls a maid over to bring the rest of his reward. They hand him a pouch of cash, and he nods but doesn't seem too thrilled. As a bonus, Mariel noticed he wasn't registered with the city, so she took the time to get him a custom ID card that lets him come and go from the city anytime he wants. That's a nice gesture and all, but Haruka's already zoned out, zeroed in on the dessert they brought out, barely noticing anything else. Mariel kept yelling at that fool all night, and didn't stop till the sun came up. Then, the class rep and the girls start grilling Haruka, wanting to know everything that went down the night before. Haruka keeps it simple, saying he just got called up to the local lord's mansion. Class rep can tell he's not lying, but she's still baffled on why the lord would want to see Haruka at all. Haruka decides to keep things low-key, dodging details about how he bumped into Mariel during his busted escape attempt. Eventually, the girls let it slide and get ready for a mission. Before heading out, class rep tells Haruka he better stay put in town, and this time, he seems oddly chill about it. The thing is, he's only playing nice cause he knows once they're gone, there's nothing stopping him. With his custom ID, he can bounce out of town anytime he wants now. But before he dips, he's got a few things to wrap up. First, he drops some cash on new gear, eats all the good food he can find, and then starts writing a note for class rep. He scribbles down that he's heading back to the forest to check on the gym bros, not that he plans to come back anytime soon. But he does feel kinda bad for those muscleheads. Once he's set, he flashes his ID at the gate, and they let him through without a hitch. This time, he's not letting himself get sidetracked by any random side quests. Soon enough, he's back in the woods, relieved to see everything looks the same as he left it. He's excited to get back to his place, but he's not paying much attention, so he doesn't spot an orc creeping up to take a swing at him. Lucky for him, his stats are way too high for some orc to handle, so he drops it with a single hit of his staff, but he finds it weird in orcs hanging around here since they're usually much deeper in the woods. And that's not the only weird thing. He stumbles on a fresh blood trail nearby, human from the looks of it. Haruka knows that blood couldn't be from the nerds, those guys are too strong to get taken down by anything out here. So he figures it must be from one of the gym bros. He starts tracking the blood trail, and eventually, he finds the gym bros lying all messed up and bloody under a tree. At first, he thinks they're goners, but when he gets closer, he sees they're still breathing. So he dumps every healing potion he's got on them until they finally come to. The gym bros start explaining what went down, and while Haruka had thought they got jumped by the delinquents, he's floored when they tell him all the delinquents are actually dead. Haruka asks if the nerds got hit too, but the bros aren't sure. It doesn't seem likely though, since the nerds left the forest a while back. They can tell Haruka's planning to go after whoever did this, so they warn him. Tanaka's gotten crazy strong now, so strong, they barely lasted a few seconds against him. And on top of that, he swiped all their top-tier weapons, making him even more dangerous. They figure he's been setting this up ever since the class got dropped into this world. And now they don't know if anyone can stop him, but they're pretty sure who his next target is. Out of everyone left, it's probably gonna be class rep, cause she's got the hijack skill. Haruka can see why Tanaka would come after her for that. But here's the thing, only class rep, the nerds and Haruka even knew she had that skill. So he's wondering how Tanaka got wind of it. The gym bros figured it out cause Tanaka kept grilling them for class rep's location. And when they couldn't give him what he wanted, he beat them down nearly to death. They didn't want to go looking for class rep and risk leading Tanaka to her. So they dragged themselves to the area near Haruka's place, hoping he'd find them before it was too late. They're sure that with Haruka on their side, they might stand a chance if they all go up against Tanaka together. But Haruka's not sure if he even wants to get mixed up in all this. Getting caught up in a battle like this wasn't his plan at all. He was trying to steer clear of side quests, but since class rep's getting targeted, he has to step in and put an end to it. Still, he makes it clear to the jocks that this fight is his alone. He's handling it solo. The jocks try to convince him not to go it alone since that's crazy risky. But when they see that fire in his eyes, they realize he's dead serious, so they back off and let him do his thing. Haruka tells them to head into town and meet up with the rest of the girls. Plus, they should really apologize to class rep for bailing on the group earlier. As the jocks take off, Haruka thinks to himself that having them in the fight might have been a good move, but he can't risk having all of them go in together. If Tanaka overpowers them, then nobody will be left to warn the girls. The smartest play is for him to take this on alone and make sure he's ready when he finally faces Tanaka. Back in the village, class rep is worried sick after realizing Haruka left the city. The other girls are trying to calm her down, saying there's nothing to freak out about, Haruka will definitely come back. Meanwhile, deep in the forest, Haruka is plotting his strategy against Tanaka because the jocks warned him that Tanaka's got some crazy powerful weapon skills. Even the weapon skills of those no-name bandits are scary. But Haruka learned something important dealing with them. Once a weapon skill animation starts, it can't be cancelled. So if Tanaka tries to use a weapon skill on him, he needs to be ready to take advantage of that weakness. To pull it off, he's got to snag a new skill, which means leveling up. Just then, he spots a bunch of goblins that came in because of the jock's blood, and these guys are pretty high level, so he takes them out for some experience. Still, no matter how hard he tries, he can't level up. He's wishing he could throw down with something tougher and get those experience points up. And right as he says it, a Goblin King pops up. No hesitation, Haruka's ready to take it down. This Goblin King's no joke, it's strong, and it's fast too, with attacks coming at him quickly. Haruka barely manages to dodge at the last second. One hit from this thing could be game over. He can't even think about hitting back without getting tagged himself, so he's got to switch it up and think of a new move. He whips out his warp skill, mixes up a bunch of other skills, and turns them into a whole new one. With this new skill, he dashes right past the Goblin King and drops it in an instant. He's pumped, feeling good that his skill mashup worked so well. But before he can celebrate, he feels this creepy, heavy presence behind him, so he backs up, bracing for the next fight. This new monster, a Goblin Emperor, and it's sitting at level 50. Meanwhile, Haruka's only level 9. He knows straight up fighting this thing head-on isn't gonna work. His only move is to give that new combo skill another shot. He fires it up and charges straight at the Goblin Emperor. As soon as he's close, he hits it, but his special skills don't even scratch it. The Goblin Emperor just stands up like nothing happened and starts swinging back at him, faster than he can believe. It's clear now the Goblin Emperor's using some kind of weapon skills. These attacks are way too strong, so Haruka's gotta focus, looking for the smallest gap in its moves so he can throw in a counter. Finally, he sees a tiny opening and lands a solid hit to the goblin's chest, sending it flying backward. But even with all that damage, the goblin just starts healing itself like it's no big deal. Realizing regular hits aren't getting him anywhere, Haruka figures he's gotta come up with an even stronger combo skill. But before he can do that, the Goblin Emperor fires off one of its weapon skills, throwing a series of deadly slashes right at him. Haruka barely blocks, but he's hurting, and his chances aren't looking too hot. But he's not backing down. He knows he's gotta push through this if he wants to get strong enough to protect his friends. He picks himself up and charges at the Goblin Emperor one last time, giving it everything he's got. By the time morning rolls around, Haruka's the last one standing. Thanks to the all-nighter he pulled, he's leveled up twice. Now at level 11, Haruka heads back home to check out his status window. Just as he thought, he's unlocked some new skills, but he still isn't sure if it'll be enough to take Tanaka down. Even so, with his custom skill, he can strike in a flash, catching anyone off guard in the middle of their weapon skill animation. He's just gonna have to bank on that and hope it swings the fight his way. Later that night, Tanaka shows up outside Haruka's place, just like he's been waiting for. Haruka remembers how Tanaka got picked on by the jocks when they first arrived, but he realizes now Tanaka was just biding his time, ready to get payback. Meanwhile, the girls have just gotten back to Omi after a long day of adventuring. As they're walking back, they spot a couple of guys slumped outside the town walls. They soon realize it's the jocks, and they're glad to see them, but they're also worried because the jocks look pretty roughed up. Class rep remembers that Haruka left a note saying he'd go check on the jocks, so she asks them if they know where he is. They let her know Haruka's out in the woods right now, putting his life on the line for all of them. Out in the woods, Tanaka's frustrated when he realizes Haruka's the only one there. He was hoping to see class rep instead. He even went through all the trouble of getting the delinquents to stir things up and split the class. That's when Haruka realizes Tanaka's been pulling all the strings this whole time and Tanaka's ready to take out whoever he needs to get what he wants. But Tanaka doesn't see Haruka as any kind of threat, so he turns to head out and hunt down class rep, planning to steal her hijack skill. But even if Haruka doesn't exactly vibe with his classmates, he's not about to let them get hurt. He steps up, raises his staff to Tanaka's neck, and says, "You shall not pass." Tanaka, annoyed that someone he sees as a nobody is standing in his way, warns Haruka that if he's that set on stopping him, he's more than ready to take him out. Tanaka lets loose his full power, hurling some rocks Haruka's way as a warning shot. He then brings up the White Room, where everyone was picking their skills. Tanaka went last and made sure to scoop up all the leftover skills nobody wanted because they were worthless. With a smirk, he asks Haruka if he really thinks he can take him down with those trash skills, then launches even bigger rocks his way. Haruka braces himself to block them, but Tanaka goes ahead and uses his unique ability tweak. Suddenly, Haruka's body starts moving all strange, like he's lost control. It's hard to move, but he somehow dodges the rocks, only for Tanaka to summon crystal spikes right under him. Haruka manages to sidestep those too, but he's worn down, feeling like his whole body just got way heavier. Tanaka, impressed, admits Haruka's better than he thought. Then, he asks how long Haruka's been on to him. Haruka says he had his suspicions from the start. Haruka figured Tanaka would either stick with the nerds or roll solo, so it threw him when he saw Tanaka hanging with the delinquents. He knew there had to be a reason. Haruka then asks when this plan of Tanaka's kicked off. Tanaka reveals he thought of it the moment they got yanked out of the classroom. He missed the hijack skill, but when he saw Tweak the skill to mess with people a little, he grabbed it. He used it to play the delinquents for fools, and the rest was history. Tanaka then says they've chatted enough. He traps Haruka's foot with a vine, then launches a blazing fire spell, convinced it'll finish him off. But Haruka suddenly absorbs the flames into his staff, using the power of the herb that fused with it. He moves to counterattack, catching Tanaka off guard, but Tanaka was just putting on an act. With a quick move, Tanaka pulls out a sword, blocks Haruka's strike, and shoves him back. Then he summons all his weapons, announcing he finally gets to use them all. He charges at Haruka with a sword, switching weapons with every hit. Haruka's completely on defense, barely able to keep up with Tanaka's fast. He tries hiding in the bushes, but Tanaka lands a heavy hit, blasting him clear across the river. Haruka starts piecing it together. He's not strong enough to take Tanaka head-on, and wonders how he's able to juggle all those weapons and powers at once. Tanaka shows up and tells him to quit while he's ahead, but Haruka pushes himself up and throws a question back, asking if he's using the copycat skill to swipe abilities from their classmates. Tanaka confirms with a wicked grin, adding that his plan was to copy the class rep's hijack skill, take her out, and snatch the real deal for himself. Once that was done, it'd be easy for him to wipe everyone out and collect their skills too. Haruka realizes he's facing his toughest opponent yet, and then Tanaka switches it up, throwing different weapons at him. Haruka fights back, but his strikes only hit an illusion. The real Tanaka is lurking behind him. Thinking quickly, Haruka points his staff down at the ground. Tanaka assumes he's giving up and charges, but Haruka sidesteps, dodging the attack in a smooth, ultra instinct-like move. He then throws Tanaka off by asking if he can use each copied skill only 3 times. That rattles Tanaka, and his composure starts to crack. Haruka reveals he figured out the weakness in his copycat skill a while ago and was purposely burning through Tanaka's copied abilities. Furious at being outplayed, Tanaka attacks in a fit of desperation, but Haruka dodges and knocks him back with a hard kick. Seeing an opening, Haruka decides it's time to end this. But just as he moves in, Tanaka fires a powerful shot, forcing him to pause. Refusing to back down, Tanaka whips out his ultimate weapon, summoning a dagger and lunging at Haruka with 2 quick strikes before vanishing and reappearing above him. Haruka dodges each strike, but as the dust settles, he realizes it was all a distraction. Tanaka's got one more trick up his sleeve. Tanaka's hiding behind a rock, building up his ultimate move, Instant Death. He hits Haruka with it, and true to its name, the skill takes him out on the spot. Haruka hits the ground, lifeless, and Tanaka steps out, laughing like a straight-up villain. He even stomps on Haruka's head for good measure and starts to leave. But then, out of nowhere, Haruka gets up and calls out, asking Tanaka why he's dipping so soon. Tanaka spins around, freaked out, and demands to know how he's still alive after instant death. Haruka lets him in on his secret. He's got a health skill that makes him tough against status effects, and instant death counts as one of those. Plus, his luck stat is maxed out, meaning the death skill's success rate was almost nothing against him. Tanaka loses it, asking why he dropped dead if he was fine, and Haruka shrugs, saying it was all an act. Tanaka's head is spinning, and he snaps, saying Haruka shouldn't even be able to move that fast while under his tweak skill. Haruka then drops another bomb. He used a skill called Blockhead, which lets him control others like puppets, and he used it on himself to cancel out Tweak's effect. Tanaka is out of control now, full-blown temper tantrum, starts throwing every weapon skill he's got at Haruka, but Haruka blocks it all without breaking a sweat. Tanaka, realizing he's been played, then dramatically drops to his knees. He remembers how he used to be bored out of his mind in school, being the genius who outpaced everyone. He'd been dying for some excitement, and when he and his classmates got pulled into this world, he knew exactly which skills to pick to turn his life into a thrill ride. He'd been willing to take out anyone for the rush, planning to collect every skill and make himself unbeatable. But now, facing Haruka, he's spiraling, furious that he's losing to someone he thought had useless skills. In a frenzy, he charges recklessly at Haruka. Haruka easily disarms him, figuring Tanaka's got no tricks left, and moves in to finish the fight. But then, out of nowhere, his sword whips back and stabs Haruka. Tanaka was hiding some remote control powers all along. Tanaka declares victory, slashing at Haruka with a grin. Haruka manages to punch him away, though, having used his packing skill to shield himself from most of the damage. He decides it's time to end this, activating his gambit skill to land a strike that Tanaka can't dodge. Tanaka collapses, knocked out cold, and Haruka walks off, saying that while he might not have the crazy powerful skills, he's got his own tricks. But he's worn down to the bone now. The damage he's been holding back starts catching up with him. His strength fails, and he drops to his knees, thinking this might be the end. As he starts fading out, memories of the class rep and his friends cross his mind. But suddenly he feels someone supporting him. Haruka opens his eyes to find the nerds by his side. He's a bit annoyed they showed up so late, but they brush it off, telling him to save the complaints for later. They hand him some healing potions and help him get back on his feet, walking him out of the forest toward the town. When he asks why they're out here, they explain they ran into some classmates on their way back from hunting. The jocks filled them in about Haruka's fight with Tanaka, so they rushed over but were a little late. They reach the city gates, and everyone's waiting for them. The girls crowd around Haruka, offering themselves as his reward, but he nervously backs off and high-fives the jock leader instead. The girls laugh, pulling him along, and even apologize to the nerds for how they treated them in the past. Haruka can't help but think this is the happy ending everyone's been hoping for, and that he's no longer needed here. He starts to sneak away while everyone's celebrating, but the class rep catches him in the act, asking where he thinks he's going. Caught off guard, he stammers, but she suddenly hugs him, saying she was genuinely worried. He apologizes, but she tells him sorry isn't gonna cut it. She's rallied all the girls in the class, and they're ready to let him have it for sneaking out of the city without saying a word. Haruka panics, but he's got no escape as the girls drag him back, ready to scold him and suck the life out of him. The next morning, Haruka wakes up after a wild dream and heads downstairs. The nerds are already there, looking ready to hit the dungeon again. From the way they're acting, Haruka can tell they're up to something, and his curiosity kicks in, especially since they've been diving into that dungeon non-stop. Turns out, they're after some rare treasure that only drops in the dungeon. They spill the beans. This item's supposed to help them set up their own harem. Haruka's taken aback. The nerds have been stuck here for a month with zero luck pulling in a single hottie. They're banking on this harem raid to flip the script. The crew gears up and heads out. While Haruka admits a harem raid sounds kinda wild, he's got no interest in it. All he wants is to get back to chilling alone, far away from everyone's drama. But before he can even think about slipping away, trouble finds him. The class rep shows up, mad as hell. Haruka freezes like a deer in headlights, wondering what he's done wrong now. He got chewed out by the girls yesterday, but clearly class rep's been holding back for her turn. She goes off, yelling about how reckless he's been and how he didn't take her with him. She's completely ignoring the fact that she was Tanaka's main target. Haruka knows there's no winning this, so he apologizes just to calm her down and promises to let her know the next time he's about to risk his life. Class rep cools off after his promise, giving him a side eye before walking away. Haruka slumps to the floor, feeling like he's losing the battle for his peaceful solo life. He needs a game plan, and fast. That's when it hits him, the ring of charisma. If he charms all the girls, they'll stop being mad at him, and he'll finally be free to dip out. With his mind made up, Haruka's ready to hit the dungeon again. Meanwhile, over at the Lord's mansion, Mariel's worried about her father. He's been working himself into the ground, and she tries to get him to chill with some tea. But he's too stressed. There have been monster sightings in the area, and he can't let his guard down yet. The whole town's taking a hit, cause merchants are scared to move their goods. And as the Lord, Mariel's dad knows he's gotta step up. Right when he's thinking about what to do, a guard busts into the room with some terrible news. A monster horde just showed up near the dungeon. Meanwhile, Haruka's already run into that horde. He wasn't planning on scrapping with anything on his way to the dungeon, but he figures a little warm-up fight won't hurt. Over at the guild though, Mariel's panicking because she has no clue Haruka's already out there handling business. She rushes in and tells the guildmaster about the massive group of orcs heading straight for the town. If nobody steps in, the place is toast. Hearing that the guild goes full alert mode, adventurers start gearing up, and class rep, who's hanging out at the guild, volunteers to help defend the town. She rounds up her classmates but quickly realizes someone's missing Haruka. Out in the field, Haruka's busy tearing through the horde. He's a little surprised at how many orcs are swarming around and even spots an orc king. Not that it bothers him, he can one-shot all of them without breaking a sweat. Back at the town gate, the adventurers are braced for an all-out battle, but by the time they're ready it's already over. Haruka's wiped out the entire horde including the Orc King like it's nothing. As he looks around at the mess he left behind, he finds it kind of weird that so many orcs showed up out of nowhere. But honestly, he doesn't care enough to think about it and gets back on track to the dungeon. When Haruka finally reaches the dungeon building, he sneaks past the guard posted outside. No need for small talk, he's here to get things done. Inside, he's blown away by how detailed the place looks. It's almost enough to distract him, but he shakes it off, he's got bigger things to handle. His mission: find the Ring of Charisma. The problem, he has no idea what it looks like, so he starts wandering around until he stumbles on a treasure chest sitting in the middle of a hallway. Excited, he pops it open, expecting something epic. But when he uses his appraisal skill to check the loot, all he finds is junk. Total letdown. Haruka keeps pushing through the dungeon, hoping to find something good, but all he comes across is trash. Eventually, he throws in the towel on trying to find the Ring of Charisma by himself and figures he'll ask that shady merchant back in town if he knows anything about it. Meanwhile, back at the town gates, everyone's been on high alert for hours, waiting on the orcs to show up. Folks are starting to side-eye Mariel, thinking she might have made the whole thing up. But then, through the smoke, they spot something moving. Weapons are drawn, tensions thick, but turns out it's just Haruka, strolling in like he's had the longest day ever. Dude's half asleep from his dungeon crawl. Haruka's clueless about why the town's on edge, but class rep wastes no time running up to him, talking about some horde of monsters heading for the village. She also demands to know where he's been all day. Haruka not wanting to spill the beans about his hunt for the Ring of Charisma, so Haruka stays quiet. Then Godek steps in, asking if Haruka saw any orcs on his way back. That's when Haruka casually remembers he mowed down a whole horde of them earlier. For some reason, this gets everybody heated. The Guildmaster and Mariel both thank him for saving the town, but immediately start lecturing him about how reckless it was to take on that many monsters alone. The Guildmaster lays it out: monster activity's been spiking, with creatures even slipping out of the dungeon. If things keep going this way, they could be looking at a full-blown dungeon stampede. He makes Haruka promise not to pull any more stunts like that. Later, back in his room, Haruka's stewing over the day's events. Now, with both the Guildmaster and Mariel breathing down his neck, sneaking out of town without someone getting on his case is going to be even trickier. The next day, Haruka heads to see the magic item merchant. The guy's not thrilled to see him, clearly still salty about whatever Haruka pulled last time. But Haruka waves it off, saying he's not here for magic items today. Just a quick question. He asks if the merchant knows where to find the Ring of Charisma. The merchant hasn't heard of it, but he does mention something called the Pheromone Ring, a piece of gear that boosts charisma. That pheromone ring sounds exactly like what Haruka's been searching for, so he asks the merchant where he can find it. Since it's nowhere on the first floor, the merchant lets him know there's no way something that valuable would have been left there, it'd be long gone by now. The merchant explains it's probably sitting somewhere around the 50th floor of the dungeon, a place no one's dared to explore yet. The dungeon's got 100 floors in total, but getting through isn't easy. You've got to beat a boss on every floor to move down. There's still a lot about the dungeon that nobody knows, but if Haruka's planning to go that deep, the merchant warns him to load up on potions and recovery gear. Haruka takes the advice and heads off to stock up. What he doesn't realize is the nerds overheard every word of his conversation. As soon as they catch on that Haruka's after the pheromone ring, they run straight to class rep to snitch. When class rep finds out what Haruka's planning, she and the other girls start freaking out. If Haruka gets his hands on that ring, they'll be too charmed to say no to him, and he'd be free to do whatever he wanted. That's not about to happen on their watch. They decide they've got to stop him at all costs. After stocking up, Haruka's on his way to the dungeon when his perception skill tips him off there are people tailing him. He turns around and spots class rep and the entire class rolling up on him. He stops in his tracks and asks what they're all doing there. Class rep flips it back on him, asking what he's doing. She outright calls him out, saying she knows he's after the pheromone ring. Haruka denies it and pulls a lie out of thin air, claiming he's looking for the tree's ring, something that lets you talk to animals. Nobody's buying that for a second. Realizing he's not going to shake them off with excuses, Haruka decides to make a break for it. Class rep and the whole class chase him right into the dungeon. Haruka's ahead of them for now, but he knows if class rep beats him to the pheromone ring, she'll use it to make him follow her rules, and that's a nightmare for his solo lifestyle. He kicks it into high gear, sprinting to put as much distance between him and the group as possible. Class rep yells after Haruka, warning him it's reckless to be sprinting in a dungeon, he might trigger a trap. Haruka fires back, saying traps can't touch him because his luck stat is maxed out. Traps might not get him, but shoddy construction's a whole different story. When he leans on the wall, it collapses, sending him plunging into what feels like an endless pit. Class rep reaches out, trying to grab him, but she's too late, and Haruka's free falling to what seems to be a terrible ending. As he keeps falling for way too long, it hits him that he's completely forgotten about his airwalk skill. He's so focused on panicking, he doesn't even try to save himself. But when the ground finally comes into view, he pulls it together and uses his earth magic to turn the floor into a cushion, breaking his fall smoothly. Sitting at the bottom, Haruka starts looking around and wonders if he somehow fell all the way to the 100th floor. There's only one tunnel leading out of there, and he's pretty sure it's the path to the dungeon's final boss. That's the last thing he wants to deal with, so he starts brainstorming a way out. Finally remembering his airwalk skill, Haruka tries to use it to climb back up. But the pit is so deep that airwalk can't get him anywhere close to the top. With no other options, he sucks it up and starts heading down the creepy tunnel. On the upside, falling into that trap unlocked 2 new skills for him: trap detection and spatial awareness. Using his new skills, Haruka scans the area. No traps show up on the path to the boss's room, but he stumbles on something far worse. This isn't the 100th floor, it's floor 101. That means he has to face the hidden boss, which sounds like a whole mess. But what choice does he have? As Haruka walks through the hallway, he notices the mana in the air is so thick it's hard to breathe, making the whole vibe even sketchier. Still, he keeps pushing forward and eventually makes it to the boss's room. With no other way out, he opens the door, bracing himself for whatever's on the other side. The second Haruka steps into the room, a rush of mana slams into him, and standing in front of him is the secret boss of the Dungeon Emperor. He knows this fight's going to be no joke, so he uses his appraisal skill to check out his opponent. What he finds is enough to shake anyone. The Dungeon Emperor is level 100. Meanwhile, Class Rep and the rest of the crew are still making their way down the dungeon looking for Haruka. They've hit the 47th floor, and there's no sign of him anywhere. Some of the group starts thinking he might have fallen to the very bottom. Shimazaki suggests Haruka could use one of the portals that send you back to the surface, but Oda explains that's not how it works. Those portals only show up after beating a floor boss, and if you skip the regular path, the portals don't appear at all. Basically, Haruka's stuck. Even though they all know Haruka's strong, the stories about this dungeon say the Dungeon Emperor is at the bottom, and it's leagues ahead of even the Dungeon King. The girls start realizing they might not have what it takes to save Haruka, since their gear isn't built for such a deep dive. Class Rep isn't about to leave him behind though, so they agree to keep pushing forward and see how far they can make it. Back in the boss room, Haruka's sizing up his options. His appraisal skill didn't show any of the Dungeon Emperor's abilities, but it did reveal one thing. This creature is the No-Life King. Haruka knows liches are monsters when it comes to magic, so there's no way he's letting this turn into a long-range fight. Instead, he decides to take it head-on, Flash stepping behind the lick. He thinks he's got the drop on it, but the lick counters at the last second with a sword. It's clear now this battle won't be the easy win Haruka was hoping for.